T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Chris, this shit's fun.
T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Chris, this shit's fun.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. On tonight's episode, we got NFL Week 15 predictions. Going to be giving preview and predictions for Cowboys, Bills, Eagles, Seahawks, Steelers, Colts. All of the biggest games of NFL Week 15, we're going to be giving predictions for. Also got to discuss Justin Herbert season-ending injury. What did the Chargers do to fail him? What went wrong for Justin Herbert and the Chargers this year? Got some thoughts on the college football playoffs. Why Michigan can possibly win it all. NIL transfer portal. Is it good for college football? Has it made the sport better? Has it made the sport worse? And we're going to dive into a couple of other things as well. Before we get into it, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Remember that every episode of the podcast that's uploaded on the channel is available in audio format on all podcasting platforms. Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from, you can find the JT Sports Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode of tonight's podcast, leave us with a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. Share the pod with your friends, family members, and acquaintances if you enjoy. And let's get into it, man. Let's talk some football. The Chargers have finally broken Justin Herbert, and I don't say that metaphorically. I mean that literally. He's out for the remainder of this season with a broken finger. And it had me thinking, going into this season, I wasn't that high on the Chargers, but many people felt this could have been the year they at least could have been a playoff team and maybe win a playoff game or two. But they've been a massive disappointment. And what went wrong with the Chargers this season, and why have they failed their star quarterback? Well, firstly, we got to go to the ownership's decision after they lost in the wild card round to Jacksonville, allowing them to come from behind and win that game, to bring back Brandon Staley. And most of us knew that it was a terrible decision to give Brandon Staley another year. They could have went out and traded for Sean Payton. They could have maybe made an attempt at trying to get Jim Harbaugh last offseason, but they opted to give Brandon Staley another year, and it backfired in their face massively. Not only is Brandon Staley one of the worst head coaches in the NFL, but he's also not good on the defense side of the football neither. The defense hasn't been great. It has played well the last few weeks, but that's not really saying much because it's not really equating to wins. And anytime this defense is in a big spot against a great team and they need a big stop to win the game, they normally don't get it done. And anytime you got a bad head coach, a big red flag or a tall tale sign that your head coach isn't good is when he specializes in one area of the football, and that's the worst aspect of the team, that being the defense. Plus, he refuses to give over play calling duties. That's another red flag. He's super aggressive or ultra conservative in fourth down situations. He doesn't really have a good feel for the game. Bad clock management, doesn't make good in-game adjustments. So bringing back Brandon Staley obviously was a terrible decision by the LA Chargers organization. Another thing that went wrong with the Chargers this year was they hired Kellen Moore to be their new offensive coordinator. Now, their previous offensive coordinator was a problem because he was too conservative. He wouldn't allow Justin Herbert to let it rip, didn't really take a lot of shots downfield. It was a pretty conservative, quick passing game offense that the Chargers were running previously before Kellen Moore arrived. Kellen Moore gets there, and you expect this offense to be more explosive. And for the first few weeks of this season, it looked like this offense was going to be vastly improved compared to what it was in previous years. But Kellen Moore's offense hasn't been any better than the previous OC's offense. Justin Herbert has taken a massive decline in performance under Kellen Moore. So not only was the decision to bring back Brandon Staley terrible, but hiring Kellen Moore, that hasn't went in their favor as well. And then the run game. The run game has been the biggest Achilles heel for the Chargers ever since they first drafted Justin Herbert. They haven't had a legitimate rushing attack with him at quarterback ever. And Austin Eckler, he's a really good running back, but he's definitely having signs of regression. He hasn't played at the same level this season as we've seen him play in the past. At one point, it got so bad that the Chargers had to go out there and promote their other running backs behind him, giving them more carries than Austin Eckler. And they ranked dead last or near the bottom of the NFL in rushing yards per game last year. And they haven't really made any more improvement this season with Kellen Moore being the OC. So you failed Justin Herbert by whiffing at your offensive coordinator hire, bringing back Brandon Staley. You still don't have a legitimate rushing attack to take some of the pressure off of Justin Herbert. You see, Justin Herbert is good enough to carry you to a win. But when you're up, you need to be able to run the football to take time off the clock. And that's something that the Chargers don't do a good job at being able to do. Plus, they get too overly reliant on the passing attack. We know how good Justin Herbert is, but at the same time, you got to throw the defense off by throwing different things at them. If the defense knows that you're just going to go air raid for the whole entire game, it's going to make things a lot more difficult, not just on you as a play caller, but for Justin Herbert, because those pass rushers get to pin their ears back and they don't really have to worry about the threat of the run game. When you don't play complimentary football, you put your quarterback in a disadvantage. The Chargers don't need to be a dominant rushing team. They just have to be able to run the football when they want to, and they haven't had the luxury of being able to do that over the last few years. And then another big failure for the Chargers this season was that they drafted a wide receiver and Quentin Johnston in the first round out of TCU, and he's been a massive bust. The dude has had several drops in big moments. He isn't dependable. He doesn't run good routes. He looks clumsy when he's out there. Mike Williams goes down, and you expect Quentin Johnston, your first round pick, to be able to fill his shoes perfectly. He's a big body wide receiver, really athletic, but he doesn't play up to his size. He's like 6'3", 6'4", 200 and something pounds, but plays like he's a 5'10" slot receiver that only weighs 170 pounds. The decision to draft Quentin Johnston when they could have potentially drafted JSN or Tank Dell, who got drafted in the later rounds. Even Josh Downs, the rookie wide receiver for Indianapolis, has been better than Quentin Johnston. If they would have drafted any other productive wide receiver that was drafted out after Quentin Johnston, this offense would have been in a much better situation. This offense only ran through two people, Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen, when he was healthy. So you don't really give Justin Herbert a lot of great options to throw the football to. You give him no run game. You give him an offensive coordinator that's worse than what he had previously, and a head coach that's a doofus, especially late in games. This was a complete recipe for disaster. And this isn't the only time the Chargers have failed Justin Herbert. They failed him in previous years. When Anthony Lynn was his head coach, they failed to give him a great supporting cast or a good coaching staff that could potentially help him elevate and get this franchise to a Super Bowl. And Brandon Staley, you thought when he first hired Kellen Moore that this was a home run hire. But now you're starting to see all the reasons why the Dallas Cowboys gave this dude the pink slip. Dallas offense still is one of the best in the NFL, and the Chargers offense this season has been one of the biggest disappointments this year. There's been more explosive plays in the passing game that we've seen out of Herbert this year compared to previously. But this offense, anytime they're going up against a great defense, they don't do anything. They got bottled up by the Ravens. They didn't do too much against the Dallas Cowboys. Seattle put over 30 on Dallas defense. And Seattle's offense, from a personnel standpoint, isn't anywhere better than what the LA Chargers have. The receivers are better, but the Chargers have a better offensive line and just as talented as a wide receiver group as what the Seattle Seahawks have, even without not having Mike Williams on the field. The Chargers failed Justin Herbert in a big way in 2023. And I'm kind of happy that we don't have to see this dude start any more games for the Chargers this year because it pretty much was pointless. All you was doing was setting this dude up to fail. You got people calling him overrated on Twitter, when really it's not Justin Herbert's fault that the Chargers have been unable to have a lot of success over the last couple of years. It's mainly due in part to this ownership not being willing to spend big money to get a big-time head coach. You got a head coach right now in Brandon Staley that isn't good when it comes to calling plays on the side of the ball that he specializes in, and you whiffed on your offensive coordinator hire who is supposed to help Justin Herbert take his game to the next level. The Chargers failed their franchise quarterback. This isn't the first time they failed their franchise quarterback. They failed Phillip Rivers for countless years. Justin Herbert is out for the remainder of this season. I don't wish injuries upon any player, but I'm glad that now Justin Herbert does have to take another snap under this terrible coaching staff and Brandon Staley. Steelers, Colts, this is a big game. Major playoff implications on the line. The Colts currently have the 7th seed. The Steelers have the 6th seed. They both are 7-6. Pittsburgh really needs to win this game. Shit has looked really bad for Pittsburgh the last 2 weeks. They lost to two of the worst teams in the NFL, losing to the Arizona Cardinals and the New England Patriots back-to-back weeks. Mike Tomlin, I think it's time for him to end up finding a new job. He's not a bad head coach. He just has peaked with the Pittsburgh Steelers organization. Mitch Trubisky is still going to be starting in this game. Don't understand why Mike Tomlin continues to torture not just his offense, but the rest of the Steelers fan base. Mitch Trubisky isn't it. The problem with Mitch Trubisky is that he doesn't take care of the football. And when you're going up against the Indianapolis Colts, you have to be able to make sure that you don't give them extra possessions. Indianapolis is one of those teams that they're very opportunistic. And if you give them extra possessions, they're going to make you pay. When they lost to Cincinnati last week, Cincinnati only gave up one turnover, and that was that pick six by Jake Browning. When you can take care of the football, you don't have special teams mistakes, you're pretty much going to have a way easier time beating Indianapolis than what the Steelers possibly could have this afternoon with Trubisky and that quarterback. Trubisky is off when it comes to ball security. He had a bad interception against New England last week. The dude is clumsy. He overthrows open wide receivers. He overlooks open wide receivers. So you may be asking me, JT, how the hell do the Steelers have a chance at beating Indianapolis? Well, thankfully enough, this is a really great defense. Mainly the defensive line is really good. Alex Highsmith, he's banked up right now, but you still do have Cam Hayward and TJ Watt, who should be more than good enough to get pressure on Gardner Minshew. Mr. Trubisky isn't good, but Gardner Minshew, he's not great neither. I'll take him over Mr. Trubisky, but you can say that the Colts have won a handful of games this year in spite of Gardner Minshew's play. He hasn't played good enough to lose the Colts too many games, but he hasn't played good enough to win the Colts more games what they already have right now. With how good this pass rush is, they should be able to affect Gardner Minshew and hopefully be able to bait him into some mistakes. That's going to be able to counter out the mistakes that Mr. Trubisky is probably going to make in this game. Neither one of these defenses are good when it comes to stopping the run. Pittsburgh's run defense hasn't been great for the majority of this season. They're 21st in the league in rushing yards per game allowed. Indianapolis, they're not too far away. They're 26th in the NFL in rushing yards per game allowed. The strength of the Steelers offense this season has been the run game. Najee Harris and Jalen Warren have been a really good 1-2 punch since week 9. They've been fairly productive. Mike Tomlin and this offensive staff, they need to make sure that they put the ball in Mr. Trubisky's hands as least as possible when it comes to throwing the football. And that involves overly relying on Jalen Warren and Najee Harris. Both of these dudes need to have at least 20 plus carries in this game. They need to run the ball every single time they get the opportunity to. And that maybe involves including Mr. Trubisky as part of the ground game. Mr. Trubisky, the only good thing about this dude is that he's a really good athlete. He can extend plays. He's really good with his legs. I don't understand why we don't see this dude involved on more designed quarterback runs. You know, maybe try to utilize the zone read or the read option. Get some RPOs in there. Mr. Trubisky, if there's one good trait about him, is that you know that he's going to be a major factor on the ground if his number gets called. It's just that the Steelers offensive coordinator has really utilized him on the ground. And it makes no sense because that's the only thing that he does well. You need to utilize Mr. Trubisky's legs. Not just asking him to scramble when nobody's open and he's trying to buy time for these receivers to get open. No, he needs to use his legs on designed quarterback runs, run quarterback power, quarterback draw. Just get him more involved on the ground. Maybe that can open up things a little bit more offensively. Indianapolis, they're going to be without Jonathan Taylor still. But Zach Moss is still good enough to get the job done. He's been good and really productive for the Colts all season long. With the injuries that the Steelers have had at linebacker, this should be a game where both of these teams could potentially have a lot of success running the football, which means that ball security is going to be at a premium. Whoever wins the time of possession battle is most likely going to end up on the winning end of things. I got to go with Pittsburgh to get the win. The reason why I'm taking Pittsburgh is because they got a great defense. Indianapolis defense is not that good. Indianapolis is a team that takes advantage when you give them added opportunities. If you can take care of the football, maybe if Mr. Trubisky only has one turnover, that could be good enough for the Steelers to get the job done. With the Colts' run defense being as bad as what it is, I expect for the Steelers' offense to have success moving the football compared relative to what they've done the past 2 weeks against the Patriots and the Cardinals. The Patriots had a really good run defense. They got a really good front seven. Indianapolis doesn't have that same kind of ability to shut down the run, and that's what the Steelers do best. As long as the Steelers can have success on the ground with Najee and Jalen Warren, you're not going to need Mitch Trubisky to do too much. Gardner Minshew, he's not worse than Mitch Trubisky. I definitely would take him over Mitch any day of the week, but you can't trust him to take care of the football neither. And against the Steelers defense that's really good at getting after the quarterback and forcing turnovers and really big moments, I trust Pittsburgh to get the win. And one thing about Mike Tomlin that I do give him credit for, although the Steelers do play down the competition very often under him, he does a really good job at having this game ready to play in big must-win games. And it doesn't get any bigger than this game this week against Indianapolis. If they lose, they could find themselves on the outside looking in of the playoffs. I already thought that they were going to be on the outside looking in after they lost to New England, but they got bailed out due to Houston's surprising loss to the New York Jets. But there's still a chance that with this loss, the Steelers' playoff hopes could pretty much go down the drain. And I already don't believe that this is going to be a playoff team. But I do believe that Mike Tomlin can have this team playing good enough football where they can get a bounce back win in a really big spot against Indianapolis. Vikings, Bengals. The Bengals last week made easy work of Indianapolis. Meanwhile, you got Minnesota, and they're playing musical chairs, Russian roulette at the quarterback position. Nick Mullins is going to be their starter for this matchup. Joshua Dobbs, the magic wore off. He didn't look good against the Raiders. Nick Mullins put this team in position to get a field goal, which ultimately was their only score on offense. Going against Cincinnati, Minnesota needs more out of their offense. Is the quarterback change to Nick Mullins full-time going to be enough to get things jump-started? Justin Jefferson, he's questionable for this game. You still do have TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison. Cincinnati's defense has had a big step down in performance compared to how they played the previous seasons under Lou Anarumo. 2023, the secondary has been inconsistent. The pass rush has been there, but not as good as what has been in past years. Minnesota offensively against this secondary, I like the matchup. Jordan Addison has been one of the best rookie wide receivers all year long, and TJ Hawkinson, he's going to be hard for this Bengals secondary to match up with. However, is Nick Mullins going to be able to throw accurate passes and make good decisions with the football? That's what this game is going to come down to. Cincinnati doesn't have a great run defense, though. But Minnesota, are they going to be able to take advantage of that? Because they haven't been able to have success running the football all year long. They're one of the worst rushing teams in the National Football League. Now, Cincinnati, their run defense held Indianapolis to only 46 total yards on the ground last week, which is a huge plus. If you can do the same thing to the Minnesota Vikings and you can get them in a situation where they just have to rely on Nick Mullins to win them the game and they got to throw the football 25 plus times to do it, you feel confident if you're Lou Anarumo about how many stops and how many potential turnovers your defense could force in this game. Minnesota, defensively, they have to be the sole reason for why this team can get this win. Okay, Jake Browning has played some phenomenal football the last couple of weeks. They got an upset against the Jacksonville Jaguars. They pulled off another big win last week against Indianapolis. And I said a couple of weeks ago that Jake Browning is like the great value version of Joe Burrow. You ever go to Walmart and you go to the cereal aisle, you got Fruit Loops, and then you got the great value Fruit Loops right next to it. Jake Browning is great value Joe Burrow. He's really good when he's able to get the ball out fast, when they can get him in rhythm. He's playing in structure. He's accurate in the short intermediate passing game. Doesn't make too many bad decisions with the football. He doesn't have a lot of athleticism. He can get out the pocket and maybe pick up a yard or two, but he doesn't have the kind of elusiveness that Joe Burrow has. But one thing that Jake Browning has done a really good job at for Cincinnati is taking care of the football and making accurate throws when he's in rhythm. And they got great wide receivers, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. The Vikings, Their defense is a really good matchup when you think about what Cincinnati likes to do offensively. They like to get the ball out fast. Well, Brian Flores has a really aggressive style defense. And with how aggressive this defense is, if they can throw off the timing between Jake Browning and Chase and Higgins, that's going to end up forcing Jake Browning to get out of structure, get out of rhythm, and maybe you can get a couple of turnovers out of Jake Browning. Okay? Now, Jake Browning, if he can take care of the football, I believe that Cincinnati's offense, they may not score as many points as what they did last week against the Colts, but if they can get the 24 points or just 20 points, you feel really good about their chances pulling off this win. Minnesota's offense, they're losing a lot of steam. You don't really have any answers at quarterback. You're going with the Russian roulette mindset at that position, and that's something that you really can't afford to do this late into the season. You need serviceable quarterback play. Nick Mullins looked good against the Raiders, but the Raiders are terrible. They don't really have a good defense themselves. And against a really well-coached defense and Lou Anarumo, although they have had a drop-off in production this year, they're still good enough to slow down Minnesota's offense, or what they have left of an offense, due to the injury to Justin Jefferson and Kirk Cousins. That's why I'm taking the Bengals to get the win. Cincinnati is a 3.5-point favorite. They should cover this game. Minnesota offensively, they struggled to run the football. They may have some success here and there throwing the football on this secondary. This is a fairly new secondary with a lot of new faces, a lot of young players. You got rookies such as Jordan Battle in there, DJ Turner. And when you got a young defense like this, you're going to have some missed assignments, and that's going to lead to some big opportunities downfield for Minnesota potentially. But overall, this is a defense that shouldn't allow Minnesota to crack even 17 points in this game. I'm not confident that they're going to get great play out of Nick Mullins. And they may end up going back to Joshua Dobbs at some point during this game. Give me the Bengals. 24-10 is my final score prediction for this game. Broncos, Lions. Last week, the Lions suffered a really shocking loss to the Chicago Bears on the road. Now, we know that Jared Goff doesn't play his best football outside, which is a great thing for him in this matchup because he's going back home to Detroit when he's playing indoors. The Broncos have been one of the NFL's hottest teams as of late. Ever since they got blown out by the Miami Dolphins and they put up 70, this has been a completely different football team. The Lions, they need this win to instill some confidence back into them. This was a team that at one point a few weeks ago, some people were making the argument that they could make it out of the NFC. Now they look like a team that they may win a playoff game and then they be an exit in the divisional round. Jared Goff needs to take better care of the football. If you want to know what's gone wrong for the Lions, why they lost to Green Bay on Thanksgiving and why they got upset by Chicago last week, Jared Goff hasn't been great at taking care of the pigskin. And you're going to have to do that against a Broncos defense that has kind of turned it on as of late. Defensively, the Lions secondary has been abysmal all season long. But thankfully, you're going up against an offense that isn't really predicated on getting a lot of big plays downfield. When you look at how Denver's offense has operated this year, they get the ball out of Russell Wilson's hands fast. He makes quick decisions with the ball. Yeah, he may get outside the pocket and kind of go vintage Russ here and there. But for the most part, Detroit's secondary shouldn't allow Denver to explode for over 27 or 30 points against them, regardless of how bad they play in the past. This has been the offense that's been predicated, Denver's offense has, on efficiency and being methodical. They want to be balanced, running the football, and they also want to make sure that they can get enough out of Russell Wilson where he's not being asked to carry this team to a win, but he can make a couple of big throws here and there due to how effective the run game can be. The Detroit Lions, their run game has been effective all year long with the two-headed attack of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, and you got to be licking your chops if you're the running backs coach for Detroit, because you're telling David and Jameer in the meeting room that be prepared to have a big game. The Broncos have the worst run defense in the NFL. They played better the last 2 weeks, but they haven't gone up against any teams that have had a remotely as good as a run game as what Detroit has had with Montgomery and Gibbs. They allow over 100 and something rushing yards per game. They're 32nd, dead last in rushing yards per game allowed. The Lions offensively, they don't need Jared Goff to throw the football 25 plus to pull off a win in this game. If you can get the ball out of his hands, put it on the ground, take a lot of time off the clock, you feel confident about Detroit's ability to win this game. If Vance Joseph's defense can come out and they can bottle up the run game, and this becomes a game where Detroit has to air it out with Goff, Goff is still a really good quarterback, but with how reckless he kind of has been taking care of that ball, you don't really know if he's going to be good enough for Detroit to win this game just strictly asking him to air it out. You're going to have to play complimentary football if you're the Lions. Denver, their offense is nothing flashy. They're just the offense that's methodical. They try to get first down. They try to take time off the clock. They want to throw in the run there, here and there as well. Detroit has a pretty good run defense. Now, they did suffer a big injury to one of their best defensive linemen not too long ago in Alim McNeil, and he was really big and a really big piece of that run defense. So we're going to see just how that run D is going to look in this matchup. But I feel pretty confident that Detroit's run defense should be able to get the job done. They're 9th in the NFL in rushing yards per game allowed. Nobody runs the football no more than what the Denver Broncos do. They're like top 5 in the NFL and rush attempts per game. So if you can take away that run game from Denver and Russell Wilson has to beat you with his arm, he still can't do that because your secondary is not great. But this isn't the kind of offense that can make Detroit pay for not having great secondary play. Russell Wilson isn't going to take too many shots downfield, and Sean Payton wants to get the ball out of his hands as quick as possible. So I don't think that Detroit secondary should get exposed against this Denver offense. Not saying that it's not capable of being able to get exploited, but I'm just saying with how this offense has been built this season, it doesn't look like the Broncos are going to be able to take advantage of one of the worst secondaries in the NFL this year. Denver's defense has played good over the last couple of weeks. They had a really good showing against C.J. Stroud and the Houston Texans, and they've also had a really good game when they forced numerous turnovers against Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills not too long ago. But you see, with how explosive and how dynamic Detroit is offensively, the only thing you really need is for Jared Goff to take care of the football. If he can get back to playing the kind of football that he was at the start of this season when he wasn't turning it over and he was efficient, this is going to be a game that I'm confident that Detroit wins. But I don't think they cover. I'm taking them to win, but I'm not going to take them to cover. I believe Denver can keep this thing close. If Jared Goff was better at taking care of the football than what he has been the last few weeks, I feel confident that Detroit wins this game by at least a touchdown. But this thing is probably going to be a little close due to how successful the Broncos possibly can be at moving the football efficiently, especially in third down situations against this defense. And plus, their defense has played really well. Their run defense isn't good. Detroit can probably take a lot of time off the clock themselves running the football. So this is probably going to be a game where you don't get too many possessions with the football. It's going to come down to who can minimize mistakes. I'm ultimately going to go with Detroit. Yeah, Jared Goff has been a little reckless, but with how well Detroit runs the football and how bad the Broncos' run defense is, I trust Detroit to win this game because they don't really need too much out of Goff when you can just run it down Denver's throats at will. Give me Detroit. 23-14 is going to be 23-20 is my final score prediction for this game. I got the Lions. Every time I see a player enter the transfer portal, when I go on social media, there's always a lot of people out there who get riled up in the comment section saying, oh, the transfer portal and NIL have ruined college football. These players don't want to fight for their spots anymore. They only want the money. And that leads me to this question. You know, ever since the transfer portal and the NIL era have really started to kick off in college football, has it made this sport better or has it made it a lot worse? Now, a lot of people that I've talked to on this matter feel like the transfer portal has done more good for college football than it has bad. And when you look at what the transfer portal has done from a positive lens, first-year head coaches now can hit the portal and build their program up a lot faster than what they have been able to previous years before the transfer portal really became a thing. Look at all the success that Lincoln Riley, Brian Kelly, and Mel Tucker had really early on with their new programs. You know, Brian Kelly hit the portal hard his first year at LSU, got Jaden Daniels, a couple of other great players, and they had a really surprising season year one under him. Same thing with Lincoln Riley. Year one at USC, they won 11 games. You got Caleb Williams out the transfer portal and a lot of other good players on that side of the football. And then same thing with Mel Tucker. Now, another thing that the portal allows you to do and why coaches that just arrive on the scene to a new program are able to hit the ground running so fast is that the transfer portal is really good at filling needs that need to be addressed immediately. Let's say you're a team like Ohio State and Alabama, and the only needs that you have are at running back, wide receiver, and cornerback. Well, you can hit the portal, get a good corner, get a good running back, and that can be it. So the portal allows you to address needs a lot faster versus having to wait 3 to 4 years via recruiting to develop a position that you struggled in previous years. Now, the teams that struggle to recruit at a highly consistent level, such as UCLA and Ole Miss, they've been large beneficiaries of the transfer portal. You see, Chip Kelly, we know this dude doesn't like to recruit, but he's been able to go into the portal and get guys such as Jake Bobo and Zach Charbonnet, and he's been able to put together some 7-8 seasons at UCLA. Ole Miss, they recruit way better than UCLA, but they don't recruit as good as schools such as Georgia, Alabama, and LSU. And they possibly never will, at least at a consistent level. So if you're Lane Kiffin, you can go into the portal and you can mix in a couple of transfer portal guys that have 3-4 years of eligibility left. You can bring them in, develop them, and then you mix that in with the recruits that you get from bringing in top 20, fringe top 15 recruiting classes. And around 2-3 years after that, you could potentially have a team that's good enough to win the SEC. Based on how good of a coach Lane Kiffin is. Same thing happened with Florida State. Take them, for example. When Mike Norvell got there, he got Jordan Travis out of the transfer portal, who a lot of people forget, he started his college football career out at Louisville. He transfers to Florida State. He's in the program for a couple of years. They develop him, and he turns into one of the best quarterbacks in college football. Same thing with wide receiver Johnny Wilson. He was somebody who they brought in years ago. They developed him, and he was one of the better wide receivers in the ACC this past season. When you're a team that doesn't recruit at a high level, or you got a new head coach that's trying to get in there and hit the ground running, the transfer portal can be really effective with making sure that you can build up your squad as quick as possible. You don't have to wait 2 to 3 years to bring in good recruiting classes, develop those guys, and then be able to have success. The portal allows you, if you use it right, to have immediate success. And also, one thing that has made me a big fan of the portal is all of the tremendous stories that we get with these quarterbacks who don't pan out with their program the first time they decide to commit to a school out of high school, such as Michael Penix and Bo Nix. Michael Penix committed to Indiana. Bo Nix committed to Auburn. His dad played there, and neither one of their careers at their first schools went well. Bo Nix transfers to Oregon. Penix goes to Washington. And next thing you know, these are two of the best quarterbacks in all of college football. Jaden Daniels, he had a brief success his first season starting for Arizona State, and then you had some coaching mishaps that transpired. He transfers to LSU, and he wins the Heisman Trophy. The majority of college football's best quarterbacks now have been acquired via the transfer portal. So if you got a head coach that has a really good offensive coordinator, or he's an offensive-minded coach and he has some familiarity, or he knows how to properly evaluate quarterbacks in the portal, you can address the most important position in football via the portal, which is the quarterback position. And if you can get a good quarterback out of the transfer portal, let's say you got a little bit of a collective behind you that doesn't have no problem spending a couple of M's or maybe a couple $100,000 to get one of the top quarterbacks in the portal, you're set. And that's one thing that the NIL and the transfer portal have allowed teams to do, which is go ahead and get them a star quarterback. It's been a lot easier to find a great quarterback in college football now with the era of the transfer portal and NIL than what it used to be years ago. Years ago, you had to recruit a guy out of high school, develop him, and if he didn't work out, you was just asked out for the next couple of years until you could find another good quarterback out of high school, or you could get a grad transfer. Now with the transfer portal, if you have the right system and you're the right scheme fit for a guy in the portal, you can give a guy a little bit of a check, bring him in, and he can instantly make your team 4 or 5 games better. Look at Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers started out at Ohio State, hit the portal. He was highly touted. He goes to Texas with Steve Sarkisian, and all of a sudden, they're in the college football playoffs. 2 teams that are in the playoffs right now have transfer portal quarterbacks, and they're going to be facing off against each other in the semifinals. Look at Justin Fields, what he did for Ohio State. Ryan Day, early into his coaching tenure at Ohio State, got Justin Fields, who transferred from Georgia, and led them to a national championship appearance. So the transfer portal today, you look at how it's been used, and I think it's been used in a really positive light. Of course, you're going to have teams that go into the portal and they're going to be able to outbid a lot of other programs for some of the top players in the portal. But the transfer portal has allowed college football to be way less SEC dominant. If we didn't have the portal this year, there's a strong possibility that we could have had 2 SEC teams in the playoffs once again. If we didn't have the transfer portal and it wasn't as prevalent as what it is now, you wouldn't have Quinn Ewers on Texas, and you wouldn't have Michael Penix playing for Washington. So I think when I'm looking at the transfer portal and the NIL from a broader scope, it's made college football a lot more better because it's been way more competitive. Look at the Pac-12. The majority of the Pac-12, if not all of their top quarterbacks this past season, were transfers. Cam Rising was a transfer from Texas. Shedeur was a transfer from Jackson State. DJ Uiagalelei was a transfer. Cam Ward was a transfer. Bo Nix, Michael Penix. So the transfer portal has led to better quarterback play. And you've had more competitive football in a lot of other conferences that haven't really been that great in the past. Shout out to my guy RS in the chat who says, watching you today from the Philippines. Shout out to you, man. When I'm looking at what has made the transfer portal and NIL, have a negative impact on college football, and what you could say has made the sport worse, is that the elite programs, it's made it a lot easier for those schools to stay on top. People had told me that the transfer portal and NIL have caused more parity and it hasn't been such a monopoly amongst the SEC schools. I got to strongly disagree with that. If we didn't have the transfer portal, Alabama, they would have never had Jermaine Burton. They never would have had the chance to get Henry To'oTo'o a few years back. They never would have got Jamison Williams, who was a large part of them being able to make it to the national championship the year they lost to Georgia in 2021 when Bryce Young won the Heisman. You see, people thought that the portal and NIL were going to level the playing field. But all it's done is make it a lot easier for teams to have a lot of resources and a lot of money flowing through the program to remain on top. Alabama is on top mostly due to them using the transfer portal and NIL. Now, they're not overindulging in it. Alabama doesn't have to overpay for guys in the portal. Most of the guys that enter the portal that go to Alabama want to go to Bama. They send papers for Alabama to look at them and potentially consider offering them in the portal. Jahmyr Gibbs, for example, he wanted to go to Bama. And I'm pretty sure there's been other players who have hit the portal and tried to get into Alabama. Alabama doesn't really have to entice people to want to transfer to them. People already want to transfer to Bama because it's Alabama. They can develop you and they can get you into the NFL. But when you look at a school like Texas, who hasn't really had a lot of success prior into the last 2 seasons, they got a lot of money to spend. So if they have a top flight receiver that they want in the portal, they can offer him more money than what the majority of other schools are willing to offer him or what they have money to pay for. And you look at Georgia, Texas A&M, they got a lot of money to spend. Georgia doesn't have to use a lot of it because like Bama, top players in the portal probably are begging to transfer to Georgia, begging for Georgia to take them. But Texas A&M, Ohio State, Michigan, with all the money that they have flowing through those programs, if there's a high-ranking player in the portal, they have the money based on their NIL collective to offer that player. When you think about what it's done to recruiting, I think that NIL has had more of a negative effect when it comes to spending on players coming out of high school compared to what the transfer portal has. If you're spending top money on a guy in the transfer portal, you're mostly spending it on a guy who's already proven, who you know is going to be able to come in and be an immediate contributor for you and have a major impact on you winning games. But when you're spending money on these high school players, you don't know how they're going to translate coming into college football. Look at Texas A&M. When they spend all that money on the number 1 recruiting class, the highest ranked class ever, most of those guys aren't even with the program anymore. You see Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M spent so money on just trying to get the best guys that they overlook character. And that's one of the negative aspects about NIL, is that you have potential controversies that can arise in the locker room. You have misunderstandings, such as the Jalen Rashada and Florida incident. Remember that? When he was offered a big NIL package, but when it was time for him to sign on the dotted line, Florida's NIL collective didn't hold up their end of the bargain, or he was promised things that they weren't able to deliver upon, and then he ends up decommitting and going to Arizona State. So I do think that when it comes to recruiting, NIL has made it to the point where just because you can buy all the top recruits doesn't necessarily mean they're going to play out or play out well, or they're going to be able to come in and deliver on the high expectations. You see, the NIL, when you're using for recruiting, is more like a dice roll. You spend $100K on trying to get the top 10 wide receiver in the 20-something whatever class. He comes in, he has some character issues. That's $100K down the drain. Meanwhile, you spend $100K on a proven wide receiver in the transfer portal. This is somebody who you can come in and have success right away. Using NIL when it comes to attacking the transfer portal is less riskier than using it to entice recruits to want to come play for you. And when recruits follow the money, obviously they're not going to be as committed, as dedicated, as more willing to work to stay and be a starting member of that team compared to players who commit to a school just because they love the school and they're not just chasing the money. Another thing that the transfer portal has really done that has hurt college football, outside of making this a bidding war and pretty much the college football equivalent to free agency in the NFL, is that it hurts the group of 5. Okay, anytime you have a star player for a G5 school, I go to FAU. So let's say LaJohntay Western, who is our best receiver, who was an All-American this year, and he was one of the best receivers statistically in college football. If he was to hit the portal, because a school like Alabama and Georgia hit him up on the phone and said, hey, like, if you hit the portal and you transfer to us, we can give you a $200,000 NIL package. How are you going to be able to build up a G5 program at FAU if your best players just end up leaving for greener pastures and chasing the bag in the transfer portal due to a team having a stronger and bigger NIL collective than you? And why would you as a head coach even want to stay and coach at a G5 school for a long period of time and try to build that program up when you're going to have to fight just to keep your players on the roster, and then you're going to have to fight to get guys via recruiting and via the transfer portal? It makes it a lot tougher of a job if you're coaching at a school that always gets their top talent poached from them. That's why you see coaches like Mike Elko leaving Duke. I'm pretty sure Mike Elko would have loved to stay at Duke for a long period of time, but it's a lot harder to sustain success at a school like Duke because not only is it hard to recruit at Duke, but it's also hard to keep some of your best players from hitting the portal. Like, be honest, if Mike Elko would have stayed at Duke, right, and Riley Leonard hits the portal, that would have given him more ammunition to want to leave because it's like, damn, I'm at Duke and I'm willing to stay, but my star quarterback is getting offered more money than what we can pay to keep him, and now he's going to transfer. Look what happened to Washington State. Washington State lost Cam Ward. They didn't lose their head coach. The only thing that happened was that they now went from a P5, well, they went from a P5 program to a G5 program now that the Pac-12 pretty much has disbanded. And Cam Ward, you look at the schools like Ohio State and Miami and the other schools that are in the mix to land him in the transfer portal, he's seeking a $1 million NIL deal via the portal. Washington State doesn't have the kind of funds to afford that. That $1 million that they will be giving to Cam Ward probably would be a large chunk of their recruiting budget. So Washington State, they can't keep up with the other big-time programs when it comes to NIL. So you lose out on a star quarterback in Cam Ward who potentially could help you continue to build up your program. So why would whoever is the head coach at Washington State want to stay at that program where he just lost his top quarterback due to NIL in the transfer portal? The transfer portal and NIL era of college football has been a major advantage to the Power 5 programs and the big boys of college football, and a major disadvantage to the G5. When it comes to the quality of good teams that we see out of the group of 5, the transfer portal and NIL era have made it a lot worse. You're not going to see a lot of Boise States or that 2020 Cincinnati Bearcat squad that got into the postseason. And even then, that Cincinnati Bearcats team that got into the playoffs, they were able to be successful because they were able to take 2- and 3-star guys, develop them for 2 to 3 years, and then they blossom into really productive players, such as Sauce Gardner, Kobe Bryant, who are now playing in the NFL, Desmond Ridder. And they got a guy like Jerome Ford from the portal, due to him not being able to get opportunities at Bama and finding greener pastures with Cincinnati under Luke Fickell. But in today's age now, and 2023 going into 2024, you're not going to have any more Cincinnatis that are going to be able to get 2-3-star guys in and be able to develop them for a period of time and then eventually have a good squad, because when those guys get even remotely close to being good, the bigger schools are going to come out there, hit them up and be like, hey, like, come play for us. We got $300,000 for you. Come transfer. You see, the players committing to the schools for money has been a large reason why the transfer portal and NIL get a lot of flack. Because now you can pretty much buy a guy from any school anytime you want to if you got the funds to do so, and it takes away from the smaller programs up there. It's a lot harder to build up a smaller school now than what it used to be a decade ago. You see, if Boise State was as good as what they were with transfer portal and NIL being such a big thing now, you wonder if Kellen Moore would have even stayed his whole entire career with Boise State. You see, like, for the Power 5 schools out there, transfer portal and NIL have made things a lot easier for you. Like, yeah, you're going to lose a couple of guys here and there that can't start, or maybe you got another school that may be willing to pay them more money to come transfer than what you're willing to pay them to stay. That's cool. But for a school like a FAU that I attend, it's really hard to build up a team that's good enough to even qualify for the college football playoffs. Like Tulane, they're going to get a lot of their best players rated not too soon, not too far in the near future. Just because if you're a program like Tulane that's pumping out great players every single year, Other teams are going to start to recognize, and they're going to start to work the phones and start leveraging what they have to offer those players from an NIL standpoint, and they're going to start using that to get those players to transfer out of Tulane. And I think to make the transfer portal and NIL a little bit more favorable for these G5 schools, the NCAA should implement a tampering rule. You're not allowed to contact any player unless they're in the portal. You got schools that are hitting up these players before the season even ends and say, hey, man, after the season ends, you need to come play for us. We got something ready for you. That's why you have so many transfers once the regular season concludes, because they've already been working the phone, talking to coaches, and getting deals done. And that's not fair to the smaller schools in college football. You see, everybody cares about G5 schools having the same opportunity as the other schools out there that are Power 5, but it just doesn't play out that way because they don't have the same access to funds and resources that schools like Texas A&M, Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson have. But overall, I do believe that the transfer portal has done more good for college football than it has done bad. Okay, yeah, regardless if you change the rules around, you're still going to have a massive influx of players that transfer every single year. You're still going to have players that chase the bag. Somebody suggested that they should have a salary cap. But the thing is that not every school has unlimited money. Ohio State, they got more money to spend than your average Power 5 program out there, but their pockets aren't as deep as what Texas is. Texas, TCU, and Texas A&M, they got the unlimited money glitch. They're never going to run out of money. They got billionaires down there in Texas at that university. So for a school like Texas, you put a salary cap on them, their salary cap is going to be a lot bigger than what a school like Ohio State's salary cap would be. Teams technically already have a budget when it comes to what they're willing to pay. And certain schools like Ohio State, they may not be willing to dish out a lot of money and NIL deals to get a wide receiver out of high school, out of the portal, if they already developed that position really well. But you see, it's just no matter how much you try to change the rules, the transfer portal and the NIL, name, image, and likeness are always going to be a big factor in collegiate athletics, no matter if it's college football or college basketball. But for college football, this has allowed for us to have more competitive football and other conferences not named the Big Ten or the SEC. Look how good the Pac-12 was because of the transfer portal, because of all of the great quarterbacks that schools like Utah, Washington, Oregon, Washington State were able to acquire. Hell, even Deion Sanders, if he didn't have access to the portal, Colorado probably wouldn't have even won a single game this season. So you guys let me know down in the comment section down below, do you believe that the transfer portal has done more good than bad? Has it made college football better, or has it made it worse? Before we move on, if you haven't already, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Remember that every episode of the podcast that's uploaded on the channel is available in audio format on all podcasting platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from, you can find the JT Sports Podcast. If you're enjoying this episode so far, rate us 5 stars on Apple and Spotify, and share the pod with your friends, family members, and acquaintances. I'm about to play a quick ad real quick. Once it gets done, I'm going to be back and we're going to get into some more NFL Week 15 preview and predictions. Man, are you tired of looking at your stale, boring-ass room? You want to know a way you can spice your room up and turn that thing into an out-of-this-galaxy experience? Click the link in the description or pinned comment and grab you a Starry Projector Light. The Starry Projector Light comes with 10 changeable color options, a built-in Bluetooth speaker, 12 and 15 switchable constellations, planets, moons, and stars. Transform your room from a depressing wasteland into a vibrant starry wonderland. The Starry Projector Light makes for a great holiday gift for family, friends, and loved ones. Click the link in the description or pinned comment and get one today and transform your room into a breathtaking, starry wonderland. We got Michigan in the college football playoffs for the 3rd straight year in a row, and this possibly could be the year that not only Jim Harbaugh gets his first playoff win, but he gets his first ever national championship. When you look at all of the other 3 teams in the playoffs, they're not as physical as what Michigan is. This is a team that is really focused on not just trying to impose their will on you, but they want to dominate you. I mean, go back and look at their game against Penn State. They ran the motherfucking football 30 straight something times to close that game. You had Blake Corum who had blood coming out of his nose. This is a tough-ass team, okay? And I know that Alabama has Nick Saban and Alabama has been in these games before. They're not new to this. They're true to this. But they're really going to get a run for their money against Michigan. Michigan, they've come out on the losing end of the semifinals the last couple of years, blown out by Georgia, upset by TCU last year. But this is a different Michigan team relative to the Wolverine teams that have made it into the playoffs before. Okay, they are highly motivated. They're probably more motivated than any other of the other three schools in there just because of the mentality that they've had all year long. Michigan versus everybody. And nobody really cares about the whole cheating scandal stuff. That's a discussion for another day. They took that and used it as motivation. And they've used that to rally behind it. They've rallied behind Jim Harbaugh when he got suspended for those couple of games due to the ongoing investigation from the sign stealing thing, right? And then he comes back and they got even more juice. So you look at how physical this team is, how motivated they are. When you go up against this team, not only are you getting ready for a football game, but you're getting ready to go to war. Okay, this is a team that they're tough, they're gritty, they're physical, they're going to scrap, claw their way to victory. And I've never seen a team that's had this kind of physicality in the playoffs ever since this thing first started. This is the most physical team that has ever made it into the CFP. And that probably is going to cause a lot of debate amongst you guys in the comment section, but I really believe it. Not only are they the most physical team in the playoffs, but they have a veteran team. Okay, you got a lot of veteran leadership. You got a lot of guys who have been on this team. Just like when they were playing in 2021 when they first made it and they got blown out by Georgia. You got guys who started in the playoffs last year against TCU. So you got guys who were there for the first time this school made it into the playoffs. Guys who've been there for not just that run, but also last year's run. So you got a veteran group that has been here before. So the moment shouldn't get too big for Michigan. Last year against TCU, not only was this team outcoached and looked like they were unprepared against the Horned Frogs, but it looked like this team just wasn't ready for the moment. That shouldn't be the case this year. You're going up against Alabama. If going up against the Crimson Tide and Nick Saban doesn't get you riled up, and everything that you've had to overcome this season doesn't get you riled up and ready to play and doesn't have you locked in, then nothing else will. Jim Harbaugh, he's one of the best coaches in football, not just college football, but when you look at this dude's resume, what he's done in the National Football League, taking the 49ers to 3 straight conference championships and the Super Bowl, this dude is a phenomenal football coach. You give him a veteran team that isn't going to shut down when things get a little bit tough. This is one of those football teams that anytime adversity hits, that's when they're playing their best. And that's what happens when you have a team full of experience. You have guys who are going to be able to come together and guys who are going to be able to pick each other up. You're going to have a team that isn't going to get, a little bit caught up in the moment. Oh, I'm facing Alabama. Holy cow, this is Bama. Like, these players have been here before. They got a lot of big game experience. They shouldn't lose this game because they get outcoached or they just come up small in the big time moments. And plus, they don't have any glaring weaknesses. Michigan, you can say that they may not be as explosive offensively as what Texas and Washington are. Their defense may not be as talented as Alabama's, although a lot of Wolverines fans will tell you otherwise. This is the most complete team in the postseason this year. They don't have glaring issues on the offensive line like Alabama does. They have a great rushing attack with Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum. You got a solid passing attack that's good enough to get the job done. JJ McCarthy is just as good as what any of the other QBs are. When we look at him from a talent standpoint, he has a strong arm, really great athlete. The only problem with JJ McCarthy is that if this becomes a situation when they're playing up against Alabama or Texas or Washington in the national championship potentially, and you have to ask him to throw the football 25 to 30 times to win it, is he going to be capable of being able to do it? I have a little bit of doubt that he can, but there's still a possibility that he can pull it off. They got a solid group of wide receivers. They're not as deep as what Texas and Washington are at the wide receiver position, but they got enough talent that if they can play complementary football, they have the run game going and mix that in with the play action passing game. This is a complementary football team. And I believe to win championships, you got to play complementary style football. You can't run a style of offense that puts your defense in a disadvantage. And you got to have an offense that can be balanced, rather that be running the football when you need to, taking time off the clock, or being able to air the football out when you need to score with less than 2 minutes before halftime. Michigan can beat you any way imaginable offensively. They can beat you with the ground and pound, or they can beat you throwing the football if the rushing attack doesn't have as much success as what it has had in the past. But this is a completely balanced football team when you look at the structure of this offense. They're not overly reliant on one thing. They're not overly reliant on the passing game like Washington is. They're not overly reliant on the ground game. Hell, I made the mistake of saying that this was a run-first team against Penn State, and they proved me wrong. You know, they ran that ball 30-something times straight, but they only threw it 8 times. And even then, the 8 times that they threw the ball, they had success throwing it. JJ McCarthy was 7 of 8 in that game against Ohio State. They had a good time not just running the football, but throwing it as well. So there's been several instances this year when Michigan has shown the ability to beat you multiple different ways. They're a balanced team. Now, they're not going to be able to beat you throwing the football 30 plus because that's not their style of football. Michigan wants to run the football down your throat, get the play action pass game going, and they want to oppose the will against you up front. They want to prove that they're the more physical football team than you. And outside of Michigan, not any other team has the kind of physicality that this team has. And they're not as complete and balanced on both sides of the football like Michigan is, even defensively. They got a really sound secondary. Mike Sanders still. You got one of the better cornerbacks in the Big Ten and Will Johnson. You got a really good front seven. Your linebackers are great. Your defensive line is great. Now, your defense compared to Alabama's, when it comes to a talent standpoint, that's a discussion for another day because it can go either way. I mean, it's pretty evenly matched when you compare Michigan's defense and Alabama's defense together, but I still think that Michigan's defense is just as good as Bama's. So it doesn't really make a difference who you feel has the better defense. So overall, the fact that Michigan is the most complete team in the playoffs, they don't have any weaknesses on defense. I said that it was Texas, but I forgot Texas has a terrible secondary. Michigan, their secondary is good. Their front seven is good. They can get pressure on the quarterback. They can stop the run. They got a good offensive line that can protect JJ McCarthy. They can run the football. They're good enough to beat you throwing the football as long as they don't need to overly rely on the pass game to beat you. Michigan, they're good enough to win it all this year, and I see why they're the favorites to win the 2024 national championship. This is one of the best teams that Jim Harbaugh has probably ever had in all his years coaching college football. This is a complimentary team. They have a style of offense that suits the defense well, and the defense plays good enough that it puts the offense in situations where they don't have to drive the length of the field all the time because they can force turnovers and get big stops. This team is complete. Not a lot of holes, not a lot of glaring weaknesses that teams can exploit. The main weaknesses that Michigan can have exploited against them is just with their style of play. If you got to go up against Washington and that becomes a game where you can't run the football and you got to outduel Michael Penix and those receivers, that game doesn't favor them. It doesn't. Now, they are capable of being able to hang with you, but they still have to be able to play complementary football so they don't have to overly rely on one thing. Because when you overly rely on one thing, you make life more easier for the opposing defensive coordinator because they know what you're going to do. Meanwhile, when you can play a balanced style of football offensively like Michigan, it's hard to know what's coming. So these are the reasons why I believe the Michigan Wolverines can win the 2024 national championship. Buccaneers, Packers. This is a huge game when it comes to the playoff implications. Green Bay needs this win to hang on to that 7th seed, and Tampa Bay, they're holding on for dear life for control of the NFC South. To me, these teams are pretty evenly matched. When you look at how they play, these offenses can be really inconsistent at times. Tampa Bay's offense, they got a lot of talent, but most of the times they're unable to run the football, and this passing attack can be really streaky. Although Baker Mayfield hasn't played bad, he still hasn't played as consistent enough as what you would like for a guy who you want to be your franchise quarterback. Jordan Love, at one point this season, many of us thought that this dude wasn't it. And then over the last couple of weeks prior to that game against the New York Giants when he had a costly fumble and an interception, this dude has been playing some outstanding football. You don't know what you're going to get out of Baker Mayfield and Jordan Love on a week-to-week basis. So not only are these quarterbacks inconsistent, but these teams are inconsistent. Look at the defenses. Todd Bowles and Joe Barry, these guys are probably the most criticized play callers on the defensive side of the football in the NFL. Todd Bowles' defense, yes, he's dealt with a handful of injuries. You know, he's been without his starting linebackers for the last couple of weeks. Levante David came back last week, I believe. The secondary has been banged up. And you had similar issues with the Green Bay Packers. You know, their defense has been really beat up. But you see, execution hasn't really been a strong suit when you look at Todd Bowles and Joe Barry. Last week, you had an undrafted rookie free agent and Tommy DeVito, who looks like the second coming of Lynn Sanity, who drove the Giants downfield, put them in field goal range to eventually get the game-winning field goal, the seal to win. And then Tampa Bay, their defense damn near gave away the game against the Atlanta Falcons, allowing Desmond Ridder and company to drive downfield and put them up late in the game. And even in that game before that, they had several coverage busts when the defensive backs didn't know their assignments or they did the wrong thing. These defenses are really talented when they're healthy, but they're not well coached. Some people may say that, oh, you're overly hating on Todd Bowles. I'm not overly hating on Todd Bowles. This is a defense that, yes, they've dealt with injuries, but a lot of their performances that haven't been great have been due to poor coaching and these defenders not knowing their assignments properly. Same thing can be said with the Green Bay Packers. But this game is going to come down to who can be more consistent with taking care of the football, especially Jordan Love. When Jordan Love is on, this dude is a top 13 quarterback. But when he's being streaky, like how we saw him last week against the New York Giants, he can cost the Packers games. The Packers don't have a good enough team where they can overcome losing the turnover battle. So Jordan Love, if he has any costly turnovers in this game, it can hurt them against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Because one thing about Tampa that they do very well is take care of the football. They're not going to beat themselves, at least offensively, with giving you extra possessions. And you can trust Baker Mayfield late in games because Baker Mayfield came through and got the job done last week against the Atlanta Falcons. And the Falcons got a really underrated defense. Green Bay, defensively, how are you going to match up against Tampa Bay's passing attack if this passing attack can get in rhythm and they're not streaky? Because in certain moments of games, Tampa Bay's offense, they can go 3 and out on 5 straight possessions. There was a stretch during that Atlanta game last week when that offense couldn't even get a yard, it seemed like. And you know that they're not going to have success running the football, at least you would think. With this being arguably the worst rushing attack in the NFL, the Bucs haven't had a good rushing attack in the last 2-3 years? Green Bay, they're 31st in the NFL in rushing yards per game allowed. So either one or two things is going to happen in this game. Either we're going to see Tampa Bay have their best performance on the ground all season, or the Packers run defense is going to have their best performance defending the run that we've seen out of them all season long. One of those two things is going to happen. There is going to be no in between, people. Now, Green Bay offensively, I trust them a lot more in this game than I do Tampa. And it may be because of Dave Canales, who isn't a bad OC. He's pretty solid, but it's just weird when you watch Tampa play this year. You got Mike Evans, you got Chris Godwin, your offensive line has been pretty serviceable in pass protection, so you wonder why the hell is it that your offense kind of just has games when they just can't get anything going, or when they just have stretches there in games when they just go cold. You see with Green Bay, the last couple of months, offensively, they've looked a lot more efficient because Jordan Love has played really good. And this is even without their best player on offense, Aaron Jones, being available. And their offensive line, I'll take their O-line over Tampa Bay because they're a better O-line when it comes to not just pass protection, but opening up lanes in the run game. Green Bay, from a talent standpoint, although both of these teams are fighting through injuries, they got the advantage in two departments that are going to be key. Coaching, I will take their head coach over Todd Bowles right now. And I like this offense more than Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay, their offense has more proven veterans, but Green Bay has probably one of the better young offenses in the NFL. And they've been a little bit more dependable in certain moments than what Tampa Bay's offense has had. So I'm going to take the Packers to get the win. This is a game that I feel can go either way, but the Packers are coming off a really disappointing loss to the Giants. They're playing at home. We know how hard it is to win at Lambeau Field around this time of the year. And they're a better team playing at Lambeau than they are playing away from Lambeau, as we saw last week. Tampa Bay, they're not a team that is super consistent offensively. And in certain games, you need this offense to be consistent because this defense damn near cost them against the Falcons, and this defense costed them against the Houston Texans. In some sense, the defense hasn't been more dependable than Tampa Bay's offense, and that's a problem because Todd Bowles is supposed to be a defensive-minded coach, but yet the offense and majority of the games that Tampa Bay has won has outshined the defense, it seems like. This isn't going to be a game where your defense can afford to get outshined by the offense. You're going to need your offense to step up and take care of the football, and you're going to need them to be able to make big plays. And I believe that Green Bay is going to be able to do a better job at that than what Tampa Bay is going to be able to. Now, Tampa Bay, I'm not expecting Baker Mayfield to get a turnover bug, but they haven't shown the ability to run the football effectively, and efficiency-wise, Tampa Bay's offense is really weird. I just trust Green Bay's offense more to keep the drive alive, to move the chains compared to Tampa Bay. And Matt LaFleur is a better coach than Todd Bowles. This team should be more prepared for this game than what the Bucs are going to be. I like the Packers to win. 27-20 is my final score prediction. Go Pack. Ravens versus Jaguars. This is one of the biggest games of Week 15. You got the Ravens coming in here who have only lost one game all year long on the road. Meanwhile, Jacksonville, they're not a great team defending their home territory, right? And this is a must-win game for Jacksonville. Houston is right on your trail, even if CJ Stroud doesn't play. If Houston loses this week without CJ Stroud, they still have a chance to take the AFC South from you next week, depending on how this game goes. So you need a win so you can stay one game ahead of Houston. Baltimore, they're trying to stay in control of the 1 seed in the AFC. Baltimore has been the best team in this conference all season long because they have a great defense. They can get after the quarterback. They got a great front seven. They're good against the run. Their secondary can give up a couple of big plays in the passing game here or there. And they did have probably their worst performance of the season last week against the LA Rams. But for the most part, Mike McDonald, their second-year defensive coordinator, he's done an outstanding job with this defense. And you got to feel really confident about how this defense can play against a Jaguars offense that's really volatile. And if you were to ask me to describe the Jags in one word, I would say volatility, because that's what this team has been. One week, they look like one of the best teams in the NFL, and other weeks, they just underperform. Trevor Lawrence, I get that this dude is battling through an ankle sprain. Okay, like that injury that he suffered not too long ago, I believe it was against the Cincinnati Bengals. I didn't even think this dude was going to be able to play last week, but he did. But he threw 3 interceptions. And those 3 interceptions didn't have a damn thing to do with his injury. I mean, 2 of those interceptions he threw it perfectly to the defender. It's like the defender was playing wide receiver. One of those interceptions was miscommunication, but it goes to my point. Jacksonville's offense is extremely volatile because when they're on, they're nearly the best offense in the league. But when they're off, they're turning the football over. They're shooting themselves in the foot. What Jags team are we going to get in this game? All right. Are we going to get the Jags team that we saw last week against the Cleveland Browns when they're just handing out turnovers like they're Santa's helpers? Are we going to get the Jags team that we saw earlier into this season when they looked like one of the best teams in the NFL when they beat Pittsburgh on the road in Pittsburgh, when they beat the Buffalo Bills 25-20 and they smashed the Indianapolis Colts and the Tennessee Titans? Is that going to be the version of Jacksonville that we see in this game? Or are we going to see the Jags team that got blown the hell out by the 49ers? And remember that when the 49ers beat Jacksonville 34-3, Jacksonville was at home. So this team doesn't do a really good job at defending home field. The Ravens, this is a team that you can't afford to have an off game. You can't afford to have a lot of costly turnovers because they're going to make you pay. Now, reasons for why Jacksonville can pull off this game is because Trevor Lawrence, despite how volatile this dude may be, when he's on, he's still as good as any other quarterback in the National Football League. Now, with that ankle injury, he should be a lot more healthier on that ankle this week than what he was last week when he was playing on it. Because as I mentioned earlier, I didn't know if this dude was even going to suit up again this season. I mean, this dude had to get helped off the field. Like, it looked really dark for Trevor Lawrence and the Jags at one point. So he definitely should be way more healthier going into this matchup than what he was last week against the Browns. Another thing that Jacksonville has going for them offensively is that you're going up against a defense that this secondary can get got. And you do have the talent to make some big plays in the pass game on this secondary. Calvin Ridley, Zay Jones. You also have Evan Ingram, who's going to be a mismatch nightmare for this Ravens offense to defend against. Well, maybe not, because they do got really good safeties, especially Kyle Hamilton. I want to see how the Ravens are going to defend against Evan Ingram, but there are a lot of weapons that the Ravens have to worry about stopping on this Jags offense. And if you get a Jags offense that hits the ground running into this game and they're not beating themselves, Jacksonville possibly could put 30 points on this Ravens defense, possibly have a similar performance to what the Rams had last week. Defensively, you know, the Ravens secondary has performed better statistically, and they've given up their fair share of big plays down the field. But Jacksonville's secondary, the same problem that they had last year, it's the same problem that they have this year. This secondary just isn't that good. And I know that they've had some big injuries that they've had to deal with. You know, they were down a couple of starters last week in their loss to the Cleveland Browns. But being down multiple starters still doesn't excuse you for getting your ass carved up by old-ass Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco's damn near 40 years old. He's old enough to be my damn grandpa. And he was looking like the prime Joe Flacco that we saw when he led the Ravens to the Super Bowl a decade and a change ago. And they also got carved up by Jake Browning. So their last 2 weeks, this defense has gotten shredded by backup quarterbacks. And even when they're fully healthy, this defense, at least from a pass defense standpoint, still hasn't been all that great. You know, there's been miscommunication in the secondary at times, missed tackles. I don't really trust Jacksonville's pass defense in this game, but I do like their run defense. And I don't know how many of you guys know this, but they got one of the best run defenses in the whole entire NFL. They're fourth in the NFL against the run. And regardless of how great this passing attack for Baltimore has looked under new offensive coordinator Todd Monken, and all of the dynamic wideouts that Lamar Jackson has at his disposal with Rashad Bateman, OBJ has came on the last couple of weeks, and Zay Flowers, this is still a team that is going to be predicated off how much success they can have running the football. We talk about how great Lamar Jackson has with throwing the football, but something that doesn't get talked about a lot is how the Ravens are still the number one team in the league when it comes to running the football. They're number one in rushing yards per game. If you can slow down the rushing attack for Baltimore, you can find a way to pull off this win if you're Jacksonville. Look at when the Browns beat the Baltimore Ravens a couple of weeks back. You see, what the Browns did in that game is that they made Baltimore one-dimensional. Now, I'm not saying that Lamar Jackson isn't good enough to carry the Ravens to a win throwing the football, because he definitely is. But with that, based on what we've seen out of him in the past when the run game hasn't been there, he hasn't been as good. You see, against the Browns, when they lost 33-31, he threw 2 interceptions. One of those was really costly. If Jacksonville can make this a game where the Ravens can only move the ball, throwing the ball, this is a game where this defense can do what they do best. And what does Jacksonville's defense do best? They're not good at getting consistent pressure on the quarterback. They don't have a great secondary, but for some odd reason, they know how to force turnovers. The Jaguars are the best team in the NFL at forcing takeaways. And this was the same thing that this defense did last year. This is just a defense that has a nose for the football, and they have a nose at getting these big turnovers in crucial moments of the game. And maybe this game can go similarly to how that Dallas Cowboys game went last year. Because you remember, when Dallas had to go on the road and play Jacksonville, Dak Prescott threw a big interception, and it was to Rashawn Jenkins, and he had the game of his life. He had a pick 6 in overtime, which gave Jacksonville the W. You can slow down the run game against Baltimore, and you can force Lamar Jackson and company to have to beat you, go in air raid mode. You feel super confident about your defense being able to come away with a couple of stops. Now, Jacksonville's defense, I doubt that they're going to be able to hold the Ravens to under 17, 20 points in this game. We don't know who the hell is going to be starting in the secondary with the injuries that they have. And even if they are fully healthy, this secondary hasn't really been all that great when it comes to being able to slow down the passing game. But one thing that they do very well is stop the run and force turnovers. And turnovers is always an odd stat to judge a team upon, because turnovers are a thing that's a game-by-game basis. You can't say, oh yeah, like, we're going to get a turnover. You can't say the Jaguars are guaranteed to have a couple of turnovers just because they're number one in takeaways. You see, turnovers are just one of those stats that it doesn't always pop up consistently, like how their ability to stop the run does. But I do like their chances of being able to force Lamar Jackson into a couple of turnovers or two just based on his playing style. You see, Lamar Jackson, when players aren't open, what is he going to do? Either buy time for guys to get open, or he's going to tuck and run. And he does have a history with being a little bit loosey-goosey with the football. So maybe Josh Allen can come around that edge, have Lamar Jackson breaking outside the pocket, and then, punch that football out. Lamar Jackson fumbles, and Jacksonville gets an extra possession. And like I said earlier, you slow down this run game, Baltimore becomes a one-dimensional team. This passing attack against this secondary that's kind of ball hawking, you like their chances being able to come away with a couple of key interceptions late in the fourth quarter. The team I'm taking to win, I'm going with Baltimore. I would have trusted Jacksonville to win this game if they weren't as volatile. If they were a more consistent team and they played their best football consistently on a week-to-week basis, I would have more confidence in them being able to pull off this win. Now, I'm not confident that this is a lock for the Ravens to win this game. If you had to ask me my confidence level about the Ravens pulling off this W on a scale of 1 through 5, I probably got to go 3. There's no denying that the Jaguars have a good enough team to win this game. And you got Trevor Lawrence. And when Trevor Lawrence is on, he's good enough to lead you to a win against anybody. But the problem with the Jaguars is that they just are too volatile. And it has nothing to do with them not having the talent and them having injuries. It has everything to do with them just shooting themselves in the foot. And the Ravens, with them being the best team in the AFC right now and them playing their best football, I like the Ravens to continue to win. I think they beat the Jaguars 34-27 is my final score prediction for this game. The Seattle Seahawks right now, their season is on life support. They've lost 4 straight games. Geno Smith is questionable for this game. The defense hasn't been that great. Philadelphia, it seems like their season is on life support mode because people make it seem like the sky is falling with them losing in blowout fashion to the 49ers and the Dallas Cowboys in back-to-back weeks. But I promise you that Philly is still amongst the best teams in the NFL. If you're an Eagles fan, you want to see Philadelphia win this game and do it convincingly. Seattle is one of those teams, though, you can never overlook, regardless of what their record may say. Because the talent for Seattle is there. And Seattle has one of the more talented young rosters in the NFL. It's just that execution has killed this team. And even if Geno Smith isn't ready to go, with the way that Philly's secondary has played over the last month or so, James Bradbury and Darius Slay look old as hell. Drew Lock, he didn't look too bad against the 49ers. As a matter of fact, he was playing pretty good football until I changed the damn channel. My fault, Seahawks fans, I guess. When Drew Lock is playing good football, it's when I'm watching the games. Because when I turned the game off, I look back at the little bug when they showed the box scores and the stats for all the other games that aren't on that you can't watch. And Drew Lock threw 2 interceptions in the second half. I'm like, bro, Drew Lock, what the hell just happened to you, man? You were playing great football, and then all of a sudden I changed the damn channel, and you start turning the football over. But it's okay, Seahawks fans. I got you this week because this is the only Monday night game that's going to be on. So I'm going to be watching this game. And the last time I watched Drew Lock play, he was taking care of the football, and he was looking very good out there. So I won't end up giving him no voodoo this week. I'm going to be watching the game, and hopefully me watching the game is good luck for Drew Lock having a good performance because he can be good enough to give Seattle the win. Seattle has a great group of wide receivers. They got a pretty solid offensive line. Kenneth Walker just got back healthy, if I'm not mistaken. And this defense has a good amount of talent on it as well. Seattle is one of those teams that they're weird because when you look at them on paper, you think that they could compete with anybody. But execution has hurt this team. Play calling on offense hasn't been great. You got DK Metcalf who gets into his damn feelings way too much. Philadelphia, they're a team that in late game situations, you know that you're going to get their best football. And this game possibly could come down to whoever gets the ball last. Philly has a great pass rush, and that's about it. Their linebacking core is beat up with injuries. Their secondary has not only been beaten down with injuries, but just poor play out of Darius Slay and James Bradbury relative to the level that we've seen these guys play out in the past. Seattle, offensively, if Geno Smith can play, they should be able to take advantage of this Eagles secondary, and they should be able to put up points. I don't expect this game to be a blowout by Philadelphia if they are able to win it. But this isn't a guaranteed win for Philly neither. Because even when Philadelphia is going up against teams that aren't as talented as them, they still underperform. They almost lost to the Washington Commanders. And shout out to my guy, Tony D, in the comment section who says, come on now, Drew Lock going to get wrecked by Philly, coming off 2 tough losses. I mean, you can say that, but based on how this secondary has played against teams like the Washington Commanders, can you really be that confident? And Drew Lock didn't look bad against the 49ers up until the second half when he started turning the rock over. So there is a possibility for this secondary to get high with how talented these Seahawks wide receivers are. And Drew Lock has a good enough arm that he can push the football down the field vertically. Philadelphia also isn't good in third down situations. They're not good in the red zone. This defense just isn't good at anything outside of their ability to stop the run. Rich, Philadelphia, if you can slow down the rushing attack of the Seattle Seahawks and you force Drew Lock to have to beat you throwing the football, I'm confident that Drew Lock is going to make a couple of plays or two if he is the starter for this game. But I wouldn't have as much faith in him being able to pull off the win as Geno Smith because Geno Smith possibly could be better at taking care of the football than what Drew Lock is going to be in this game. And turnovers could hurt Drew Lock, and it could hurt the Seattle Seahawks offense. And another reason why Seattle has had a little bit of a down stretch, losing 4 straight, is because they don't execute well in close games, especially in the fourth quarter. In the fourth quarter, this team just falls apart. Philadelphia, they play their best football in the fourth quarter. That's why I'm taking them to win this game. I believe this is going to be a bounce-back game for Jalen Hurts and company. I don't expect it to be a dominating win by any stretch of imagination. I do believe that this will be a close game, regardless if Geno Smith starts or if Drew Lock is starting. With how Philadelphia's defense has looked the last few weeks, I feel confident that Drew Lock can make some big plays with how good the receivers are around him and how good this offensive line can be if they give him time to throw. I'm taking Philly 31-27 is my final score prediction for this game. We got the game of the week in the NFL this week. The Dallas Cowboys, red hot right now, coming off a blowout win over Philly. They're taking on the Buffalo Bills. Holy cow. The stakes are as big as ever. The Buffalo Bills need this win to keep their playoff hopes alive, and the Dallas Cowboys need this win so they can stay in the mix for the 1 seed. I don't know who's going to win this game. Honestly, both of these teams are getting outstanding quarterback play. Dak Prescott has played himself into the MVP discussion. And Josh Allen, other than that turnover-prone game that he had against the Denver Broncos, this dude has been phenomenal. And he's played at an MVP level. And I've been arguing with a couple of people, making no argument for Josh Allen to be in the MVP discussion. Buffalo's defense plays really well for the first 3 quarters and a half, but anytime they're in a close game and they need a big stop to win it in the fourth quarter, they just fall apart. And they beat Kansas City last week, but if it wasn't for that costly offsides penalty by Kadarius Toney, maybe Kansas City ends up winning that game. This is a defense that just shrivels up in big moments under Sean McDermott. But with Josh Allen, though, you know you're going to have a shot to win it if you have the ball in his hands to end the game. And this possibly could be a game that comes down to whoever gets the ball last on offense. Okay, you trust Dak Prescott with the ball in his hands. He's taken great care of the football this year. Not a lot of turnovers. Josh Allen, when he's not turning the football over, we know what this dude can do. But you see, the problem with Josh Allen is the turnover issue. The turnover issue hasn't really been a big deal for them the last couple of weeks. He did have an interception against Kansas City. Going against Dallas, though, they're a team that excels at creating takeaways, especially when you have aggressive corners such as DaRon Bland. And I wonder how these receivers of the Buffalo Bills, Gabe Davis, Stephon Diggs, and including Dalton Kincaid, he's not a receiver, he's a tight end, but you might as well include him in that department as well. How are they going to fare up against this Dallas secondary? Is this going to be a Dallas secondary that is going to get beat by double moves? Is this going to be a game where DaRon Bland gets carved up by Stephon Diggs? You remember a couple of weeks ago, Thursday Night Football, DK Metcalf went over $100 and a couple of tutties on DaRon Bland. DaRon Bland was getting cooked all game long by Seattle. They were running whoever offense on him. How is DaRon Bland going to play against arguably one of the best receivers in the NFL and Stephon Diggs? That's going to be a key matchup to watch. Now, Buffalo, I want to see how much success they're going to have on the ground with James Cook. Dallas has a pretty good run defense. So does Buffalo. James Cook could be an X factor for Buffalo winning this game. Not only is he really explosive when he gets the ball in his hands on the ground, but he's also a factor in the passing game. And you know, Dallas, I wonder how they're going to try the game plan for James Cook. James Cook could be one of these players that could be the unsung hero for Buffalo winning this game. He had a big touchdown reception not too long ago. I believe it was against Kansas City. And I just love James Cook's game. You look at Dallas, you got Tony Pollard. They haven't really been able to get him going this season, but he still is pretty effective. But the Buffalo Bills are really good against the run. Same thing with the Dallas Cowboys. This could be a game that comes down to the quarterback play. Which quarterback is going to be better in big moments? Who can take care of the football? Who do you trust more? Dak Prescott or Josh Allen? You know that Josh Allen is more talented with his athleticism, how much of a tank he is when he decides to run the football. He had a rushing touchdown last week when Kansas City did pretty much an all-out blitz. It was a cover zero blitz. Everybody was coming down trying to get Josh Allen, and it didn't fucking matter because Josh Allen bulldozed pretty much all of Kansas City's defense and still scored the touchdown anyway. Against Michael Parsons and the cyborgs that Dallas has on this defense, though, how are they going to try to contain him? If you can keep Josh Allen in the pocket and force him to beat you, and you don't allow him to get outside the pocket and make all kinds of these crazy throws. It was one throw last week. It was another crazy ass moment Josh Allen had when he's running towards the sideline. It looks like he's about to step out of bounds, and this dude keeps his feet in bounds, throws a dime to another receiver downfield, and it ended up resulting in a fumble, I believe. But this dude, Josh Allen, just does all kinds of insane shit every single week. Dak Prescott can't pull off the kind of plays that Josh Allen can, but that doesn't mean that he hasn't been as good. This dude has been methodical. He's been efficient, and I love his cadence. Y'all listen to Dak Prescott's cadence. This dude has the coolest cadence in the history of football. Here we go. Like, that's just too cool. But back on the game, with Dak Prescott and this offense, they've been able to do whatever they wanted to do throwing the football. You finally got Brandon Cooks going. You got CeeDee Lamb looking like a top 3, top 5 receiver, wherever you want to rank him. I'm not going to push back against you. Buffalo's secondary has been incredibly sensational, though. And yeah, they had some moments when they gave up some big plays against the Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. But for the most part, this is a fundamentally sound secondary. They don't have a lot of miscommunication issues. They don't have blown assignments, and they can get after the quarterback. Dallas offensive line Thursday night against the Seattle Seahawks a few weeks ago, they had a lot of success getting pressure on Geno Smith. And not just that, but Dallas, their offensive line, gave up a good amount of pressure to Seattle's pass rush. So this is a Buffalo Bills defensive front that has a lot of guys who can get after you. Von Miller hasn't really been that much of a impact player the last few weeks for Buffalo, but you still have to account for him. AJ Epinesa, like there's a lot of talent and depth on this defensive line when it comes to the pass rush of the Buffalo Bills. This is a game that can really go either way. Okay, Dallas doesn't give the ball away too often, but the Bills defense, they do a great job at forcing takeaways. Same thing with the Dallas Cowboys. Their defense is sensational at forcing turnovers. And in a game like this, even though Buffalo is playing at home and Buffalo has played their best football when they've been playing in Buffalo this year, you know, I got to go with the Cowboys to win. You see, the Cowboys, to me, right now, they're playing their best football, and this is a Cowboys team that I haven't seen in previous years. And this schedule that they have to close out the month of December is incredibly tough because after this game, they got to play the Miami Dolphins. But they're one of those teams that they're so talented on both sides of the football, and with how good they are at forcing turnovers, with the quarterback prone, with a turnover-prone quarterback and Josh Allen, I just take Dallas to win this game because I trust their defense to get a big stop more late in this game than I do Sean McDermott's defense. Josh Allen, he's going to give them a couple of turnovers. I don't know when they're going to happen. It could be early in this game. It could be late in this game. But if you're a Bills fan, you're definitely hoping that those turnovers transpire early in this game because late in this game, it'll be backbreaking for you. But Dallas, I just trust them more late in this game than I do the Buffalo Bills. Not just because they're good at forcing turnovers and Josh Allen with his style of play can be a little bit reckless, but also because this offense against Sean McDermott's defense in the fourth quarter, I like their chances of them being able to get the job done. Buffalo's defense has not really been that dependable late in games all season long. Even against Kansas City, if it wasn't for Kadarius Toney giving them that gift, they possibly would have lost that game. You look back to how they lost to the Philadelphia Eagles. You know, they get the field goal in overtime, and it doesn't matter because Philly goes down the field and they scored a touchdown to seal the win in OT. This isn't a defense that has been proven to be trustworthy, especially with the game on the line. I like Dallas to get the win. 31-27 is my final score prediction for this matchup. Shout out to my guy Tony D with the $19.99 donation. He says dislike Dallas with the passion, but is this Dak's year? Honestly, it possibly can be. I don't know if they win the Super Bowl or not, but in terms of the MVP discussion, I definitely do believe that Dak Prescott is going to make a strong claim for the MVP award this year. The only person who really has been playing at the same level as Dak Prescott has been Brock Purdy. And statistically, Dak Prescott is probably going to have better statistics than Brock Purdy, and he's going to have more impressive numbers than Brock. I do believe that this is Dak's year to win MVP. I don't know if it's Dallas' year for certain that they're going to win it all, but I do feel really confident about their ability to at least win a playoff game and make it to the conference championship. But I appreciate the $19.99 donation. Tony D, shout out to you. You also say, all respect, love your stuff, been here for a long time. I appreciate you, man. JT, list your top 5 players on the field in this game. Top 5 players in the Dallas Cowboys Buffalo Bills game. Okay, I got you. So, top 5 players in the Dallas Cowboys Buffalo Bills game. A subscriber wanted me to do this. Top 5 players. You got Michael Parsons. He's going to be a really big difference maker for keeping Josh Allen contained inside the pocket. Okay, Josh Allen, he does a lot of crazy shit when he gets outside the pocket. Michael Parsons is so much of an athletic monster that he's good enough to be able to keep pace with Josh Allen when he decides to get out the pocket. And if you're Josh Allen, you probably want to make sure that if you scramble and try to buy time outside the pocket and try to create plays or extend plays or whatever you do, you want to make sure that you're doing it on the side that Michael Parsons isn't lined up on, because he's good enough to chase you down and haul you down and keep you from getting too many big yards on the ground game. Second most important player in this game, Dak Prescott. Okay, Dak Prescott has been playing at an MVP level ever since they lost to the Arizona Cardinals. He's been better at taking care of the football. He's been really efficient. This dude also has been really poised inside of the pocket when there's been pressure in his face. Josh Allen, he's my third most important player in this game. Josh Allen needs to do a good job at taking care of the football. If he can do that, the Buffalo Bills most certainly have a chance to win this matchup. James Cook, Stephon Diggs, they're my other 2 key important players for the Buffalo Bills in this game. You possibly could go with CeeDee Lamb, but I'm going to go with Stephon Diggs and James Cook just because that this offense is going to be so dependent on making sure that those guys can have a big game. If James Cook can have a big game on the ground for Buffalo, it would take a lot of pressure off of Dak Prescott. Well, a lot of pressure off of Josh Allen, and asking him to have to win this game, just going air raid. And against this secondary, you like your chances if you're Dallas of forcing a turnover or 2 from Josh Allen. And James Cook, he's the unsung hero. He possibly could be the player that nobody's talking about who could be a big difference maker in this game. Then you got Stephon Diggs. You know, Stephon Diggs is possibly going to be matched up against Stephon Gilmore and DaRon Bland. If he's matched up against DaRon Bland, I wonder if he's going to cook DaRon Bland with those double moves, because we've seen what DK Metcalf did to him on Thursday Night Football. But these are my 5 top players on the field for the Dallas Cowboys Buffalo Bills game. Brandon Staley, the writing is on the wall. He's going to get the pink slip any day now. It's time to start talking about the next potential candidates to be the Chargers' next head coach in 2024. I got a lot of good ones on this list. We can start off with Ben Johnson, currently the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. He's been their OC for the last couple of seasons. This has not only been one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL under Ben Johnson's play calling, but one of the most innovative. They do a lot of creative things. There was a play earlier this season when Penny Sewell ended up picking up a first down. You got Jahmyr Gibbs, who's been utilized a lot over the last couple of weeks by Ben Johnson, not just on the ground, but in the passing game also. And he's been able to rejuvenate Jared Goff's career. When Jared Goff first arrived in Detroit, he pretty much was looked as the reason for why the Rams couldn't get over the hump. And then the Rams go ahead and they won the Super Bowl with Matthew Stafford. So you look at Jared Goff, with Ben Johnson being his OC, he went from being casted off on the island of misfit toys to being quietly one of the NFL's most efficient quarterbacks. Now, he has had a problem with taking care of the football during the second half of the season, but Ben Johnson, he's done God's work with making sure that this Lions offense not only is innovative and creative, but making sure that Jared Goff has played at an efficient and a really high level. The LA Chargers, you need an offensive-minded coach in there if you're going to go ahead and move on from Brandon Staley, because the offense has failed Justin Herbert the last couple of years. Yeah, you can put a little bit of the blame on him for the disaster that happened in the wild card round against Jacksonville last season. That's cool, but you've been unable to have an effective rushing attack, and that's even with you having a pretty good offensive line. You've had one of the NFL's worst run games for the last 2-3 years. Ben Johnson, with how well the Lions have run the football this year with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, not only should he be able to elevate Justin Herbert and have him playing at his full potential, but he should finally have an offense that can give Justin Herbert a little bit of a break and finally have an offensive coordinator that can help him establish a complementary style of football. The Chargers don't play complementary football. They don't do a good job running the football to take pressure off of Justin Herbert late in games, and that's a large reason why they can't find ways to hold on to wins, because they can't take time off the clock. Ben Johnson would be a perfect hire for the LA Chargers, as long as they're not willing to be cheap. You see, the problem with this organization is that they're too cheap. They're not willing to spend the money that it takes to get a top-notch head coaching candidate. Ben Johnson, I don't think he's going to be too pricey compared to the other guys that I have on this list that I feel the Chargers should hire. But I do think that if the Spanoses aren't willing to open up the wallet just a little bit, they possibly could miss out on Ben Johnson, and it would be a huge mistake. You pair Ben Johnson up with one of the most talented quarterbacks in the NFL and Justin Herbert, there's no reason why the Chargers possibly couldn't make a deep playoff run year one with him at the helm. Now, if you want somebody who is more proven and has experience at being able to win in the National Football League, you might as well go ahead, open up the wallet, and get Jim Harbaugh. Now, this is probably a pipe dream for Chargers fans out there. We know how cheap this organization is, but if they really are dedicated to trying to win, I believe that Jim Harbaugh should be the first dude who they should call. Okay, he took the 49ers to 3 straight NFC championships, led them to 1 Super Bowl, where they nearly could have won that game if the lights never went off. I mean, Jim Harbaugh is a sensational football coach. He's won everywhere that he's been. Stanford, San Francisco, even in Michigan. He's led them to 3 straight college football playoff appearances and 3 straight Big Ten championships. And he also is an offensive-minded coach to a certain extent, even though he kind of has the mentality of a defensive-minded coach, because he's all about trench plays. He's all about physicality and toughness. But Jim Harbaugh, if the Chargers were to hire him, there's no reason why he wouldn't make this squad a immediate Super Bowl contender. And in the AFC North, when you got to go against Sean Payton, Andy Reid, and Patrick Mahomes twice a season, you need a big-time head coach who's good enough to make sure that not only your team is going to be ready to play, but you're not going to get out-coached like how you have so many times with Brandon Staley being your head man. Jim Harbaugh would immediately make the LA Chargers right now a front runner to win it all next season if he was to get hired by this team. And I do believe that the Spanoses are going to change their approach. I do think that they realize that they can't continue to go cheap with hiring new head coaches. If they were ever going to find a year to open up the wallet, this would be the year to go ahead and hire Jim Harbaugh. And I don't think that the Spanoses are so cheap that they're just reluctant to pay a big-time head coach. Maybe they just don't see a big-time head coach that's worth spending the money on. Like, you see how much money that Sean Payton's getting paid to coach the Broncos. But Jim Harbaugh, if he was interested in this job, which he should be because it's pretty much tailor-made for him to win right away, I don't see why the Spanoses wouldn't go ahead and give him a call and go ahead and pay him the money that he wants. You see, Michigan, they're offering him a new contract right now when his extension is only somewhere around $11 million a year. The Spanoses should easily be able to match that and give him a $15 million contract to have him come coach this football team. And they have spent money in the past. It used to be really cheap when it came to signing players in free agency. If they can change their mindset when it comes to free agency, I don't get why they wouldn't change their mindset when it comes to hiring the right head coach to maximize having a franchise caliber quarterback in Justin Herbert and an already tailor-made Super Bowl caliber team. You get Jim Harbaugh in this mug, there's no way the Chargers don't at least make it to the divisional round of the playoffs during the 2024 NFL season. If you don't want to go Ben Johnson or Jim Harbaugh and you want to try to go as cheap as possible, Brian Callahan probably could be the best budget hire you could make. Okay, Brian Callahan, he's been the offensive coordinator ever since Zach Taylor first arrived as the head coach in Cincinnati. He doesn't call plays, but he does assist in the game planning, helping with Zach Taylor, getting the offense right in certain situations. And Brian Callahan got a couple of head coaching interviews last offseason. He's a really bright offensive mind. You know, that Zach Taylor, Sean McVay coaching tree normally produces some pretty good offensive minds. Brian Callahan, maybe he could be an upgrade from Brandon Staley because he's an offensive-minded coach that's going to specialize on the offense side of football, and he may not specialize in defense, but I don't think it would take too much effort for him to hire a good defensive coordinator. You look at Brian Callahan and the role that he's contributed to helping Joe Burrow reach the level that he's at right now. He played a major factor in the Bengals being able to make it to the Super Bowl in 2021 it was. So Brian Callahan, he wouldn't be a big name or flashy hire. He would be a budget hire if you're still looking to stay cheap, if you're this ownership group. But he wouldn't be a bad get for the Chargers. He would be a pretty good fit with how much knowledge he has on the offense side of football. I do believe that he probably would take over the play calling duties, but I wouldn't be too worried about that. You know, Zach Taylor, his play calling is pretty good. He also spent time coming from somebody that's under that Sean McVay tree. I don't believe play calling would be an issue with Brian Callahan at the helm. Hopefully he could have the running game improved. And there's just way too much talent for this offense to just not be a top 10 unit with him at the helm as head coach. And we've seen that offensive-minded coaches are now starting to come into the league and they're starting to have more success than the defensive-minded guys or the guys who don't really specialize in anything. They are able to build a special relationship with their quarterback. Brian Callahan, he's a really likable guy. Nobody has anything negative to say about him inside of the Bengals organization, and he's somebody that Zach Taylor really respects despite the fact that he doesn't call plays. Brian Callahan would be a pretty solid hire for the Chargers if they were to go cheap. Brian Flores, not an offensive-minded guy, defensive-minded coach. He's the DC for the Vikings, but he's done wonders with that Vikings defense. The Vikings right now are 5th in the NFL and points per game allowed at 18 point something. Last year, they were not only one of the worst defenses in the NFL, but they were really conservative. And there's been a handful of games this year, such as their recent win against the Raiders and when they upset the 49ers a couple of weeks ago on Monday night, that has been due in part to how good of a defensive coordinator Brian Flores is. He's head coach material. There's no reason this dude shouldn't be a head coach right now. In his final 2 years when he was the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, he had a winning record. He went 9-8. Not too often are you going to see a head coach get fired for having winning seasons that early into his coaching tenure. And out of all of the coaches that have come from the Bill Belichick coaching tree, he probably is the best one of them all. Okay, he didn't get along with Tua. He never really was on board with drafting Tua. He much rather would have preferred to have either Jordan Love or Justin Herbert. Well, you give him to the Chargers and he finally will have the quarterback that he's been wanting for a very long time. Now, can he get the offense right? That's the question. But with so much talent on the offense side of football, with you having a pretty good offensive line, a good group of wide receivers, especially when Mike Williams gets back fully healthy, you shouldn't really struggle at finding an offensive coordinator that should want to take over coaching one of the most talented offenses led by one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Brian Flores, he will fix this defense. This defense under Brandon Staley has been a laughingstock. He will get better play out of the secondary. You'll definitely get better play out of Asante Samuel Jr., who has not really lived up to his billing when he was drafted a few years ago out of FSU, more so due to the coaching. Brian Flores is going to be able to put him in a system that's really going to get the most out of him. And then I'm really excited to think about all the possibilities that Brian Flores could bring to the table when it comes to the versatile ways that he can use Derwin James. And he's way better of a defensive coordinator and a defensive mind than what Brandon Staley is. And in a conference that's dominated by great quarterback play, bringing Brian Flores to the AFC, especially when you got to go against Sean Payton and Patrick Mahomes twice a year, that would be a really big benefit for you if you can get him and he can get the offensive coordinator hired right. This dude is a fantastic head coach. I don't think any of us can deny that this dude is a winner. He won with the Miami Dolphins team his first season. That was expected to be the worst team possibly in the history of the NFL over the last decade. They weren't expected to win a single game, and he was able to rally off a couple of wins. And plus, they tried to pay this dude to lose on purpose. He was like, nah, F that, man. Like, I'm going to try to win with the guys that I have. And his last 2 seasons in Miami, he was a winner. Only thing he has to get right is the offensive coordinator. And that really shouldn't be an issue because he really hired the OC that he did because he was trying to make work with the quarterback that he was forced to draft that he never really wanted in the first place. Maybe he could hire the right offensive coordinator and do something that Brandon Staley has been unable to do. And lastly, I got Bill Belichick. Okay, Bill Belichick, I don't think he's done. I do want to see him get one more opportunity. And even with New England this season, a lot of the reasons why they've lost games hasn't been because he's been out-coached. The defense still has been fantastic. It's just that he has not been able to get it right with offense. And a main reason for that is because he sucks at drafting offense. You know, there's a rumor that says that, not even a rumor, C.J. Stroud told the Texans to draft Tank Dell. And C.J. Stroud looks like he has a better eye at drafting wide receivers than what Bill Belichick does. But Bill Belichick, he gets hired by the Chargers. You don't have to worry about him assembling the offense because the offense, the talent is already there. You already got Keenan Allen, Mike Williams at wide receiver. You got a great offensive line. You have to figure out the running game. You got a proven top-level quarterback in Justin Herbert. All you got to figure out is the defense, and the talent for that defense is there too. You got Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack. Maybe if you want to bring back Kenneth Murray, you can figure out a way to get the most out of him. You're going to have Derwin James. Bill Belichick loves him, Derwin James kind of players. Really versatile, can line him up anywhere. He would be a fantastic fit with the style of defense that Bill Belichick likes to run. Bill Belichick, maybe New England wasn't the right place for him to end his career off due to his ineptitude to assemble a competent offense. He goes to the Chargers. Don't really have to worry about that. You probably don't even have to allow him to become the GM. Just allow him to coach the football team, keep the current GM that you have, and just continue to build up that offense. And all he needs to do is hire Josh McDaniels to be his offensive coordinator again, because Josh McDaniels, he's not a good head coach, but this dude is a fantastic OC. Bill Belichick, Jim Harbaugh will probably be my top 2 picks to be the next head coach of the LA Chargers if I was the dude making the decisions. But if I couldn't get my hands on Bill Belichick or Jim Harbaugh, I would go after Ben Johnson. You definitely need a young, innovative offensive mind if you can't get an already established head coach. Bill Belichick and Jim Harbaugh, they're established. They've won at the highest level. And I'm pretty confident that with either Bill Belichick or Jim Harbaugh, you shouldn't miss out on the playoffs. With Brian Flores, maybe there's a small chance that you miss out on him. You know, and maybe if you do get Brian Flores, there's a small chance that you may not be able to have the success that you've been able to have if you would hire a Jim Harbaugh or Bill Belichick, because these guys have proven that they know what it takes to coach a Super Bowl caliber team. Brian Flores, he's a good head coach. He's good enough to be a playoff caliber coach that can get you to the playoffs and maybe you win a playoff game or two, but we don't really know yet if he's good enough to lead a team to a Super Bowl. That remains to be decided, but Jim Harbaugh, Bill Belichick would be my top 2 picks. If you can't get them, I would get Ben Johnson. He's probably the most promising offensive mind out there who's going to be a head coaching candidate this offseason. These are my selections for who I believe are the best candidates for the Chargers head coaching job in 2024 when they finally fire Brandon Staley. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate everybody for tuning in. My guy Tony D says Staley got to go. Yo, JT, I don't think Belichick is done. Chargers could be enticed for him. Absolutely. My guy Pays and Plays Podcast says, JT, you are biased as a Steeler fan, but no way you trust in Mitch as at QB. Like, listen, man, I don't trust Mitch. It's just the fact that the Colts, they don't have a great defense. They got shredded by Jake Browning. And yeah, Mitch Trubisky could give you a couple of turnovers or two. Gardner Minshew against the Steelers defense, I like him to have a couple of turnovers also. And Mike Tomlin, he may not have the Steelers always ready to play against inferior competition, but he always has the Steelers ready in big games. And the Steelers kind of own the Colts. Every time the Steelers play the Colts, they normally beat them. So I think that despite the fact that Mitch Trubisky kind of is a handcuff, playing with Mitchell Trubisky at quarterback is the equivalent to winning games with hands tied behind your back. But with how good that defense is and the fact that Gardner Minshew is starting at QB for Indianapolis, I like the Steelers' chances against a backup QB, and I think that this is a spot that the Steelers can bounce back. I'm still not confident that they're going to make it into the playoffs, but if you follow Mike Tomlin, you know that one thing that he does a great job of throughout his career is finding ways to win the big games against teams that have high stakes on the line. Okay, when Mike Tomlin falls short is when he's going up against teams that aren't that good, especially late in the season. But if you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Remember that every episode of the podcast is available in audio format on all podcasting platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. You can find the JT Sports Podcast